10 days ago, Finance Minister Michael Noonan reaffirmed to the Dáil that the pension levy would end by 2015. Now, the money raised from the pension fund levy is being used to pay for the government's jobs initiative introduced in May of 2011. It's raised €946 million over the past 2 years. But one pension specialist group believes the pension levy will have to be kept in place if the state has to pick up the bill for pension schemes from insolvent companies. Now, Samantha McConnell is Chief Investment Officer with IFG Corporate Pensions. She joins me now. Samantha, Michael Noonan was fairly adamant when he responded to, I think it was a parliamentary question, that he won't be keeping the pension levy after 2014. So what makes you strongly believe the opposite and that he'll have to?
Well, I think it comes back down to, Mary, the potential cost that could be in the system for making good the liabilities on this case. Media estimates put that at around about 300 million. The issue here, though, is that's only one scheme. What about other schemes that have potentially wound up that have been in a double insolvency situation?
And remind us, you're referring to the Waterford Crystal workers there and a recent European Court decision.
Exactly. And effectively, that held that the government had failed to transpose into Irish law an insolvency directive that would have passed on specific protections onto members of DB pension schemes that went into a wind-up situation where the company was also insolvent. Now, the current situation in the Irish market, Mary, is that there's a deficit of 17 billion on all defined benefit schemes, and roughly about 80 to 90% of schemes are in deficit. Now, ultimately, if there are other schemes other than Waterford that are also in this situation, the impact on the government's finances is catastrophic. And as we're all well aware, I don't believe that it's possible for the government to bear that cost, and it will ultimately be put back on the industry. And that's effectively what has happened both in the UK and the US. Now, whether we call it a levy or whether we call it a tax, it doesn't really matter. I think ultimately what will happen here is that a levy or a tax will be put back on the industry and effectively will be picked up by employers of defined benefit schemes that are currently solvent or potentially trying to work their way to solvency.
Catastrophic is a pretty big word. Catastrophic to the tune of how much potentially?
Well, again, if you go back to the figure I quoted there, there's a 17 billion deficit on DB pension schemes currently. So, you know, we estimate roughly 300 million for the Waterford situation. You could be talking multiples of that at a worst case scenario.
But Waterford, Samantha, is a particular set of circumstances.
Absolutely, but you can look at situations here, Mary, and it has happened in the US, whereby companies effectively put companies into administration to allow themselves to walk away from their pension scheme liabilities. I'm thinking in particular here of the Delta situation. And effectively, because of the Irish situation where there is no debt on the employer, an employer can walk away from a scheme in deficit.
Just very quickly, Samantha, can I ask you, do you believe
Sure.
that if the pension levy stays in place, is it going to be levied on everyone, whether you're DB or defined contribution?
No, we would certainly be of a very strong view that DC should be exempt. We don't believe it should be fair that members of defined contribution schemes, where effectively they don't have any promise come retirement, effectively an individual is underwriting their own pension retirement, they should be exempt. Ultimately, what we're saying here is that the government can't afford to fund the potential cost here. It will come back on industry, and it will come back effectively to employers.
It comes back on industry, and industry passes it on immediately to those who are paying for pensions.
Absolutely. And ultimately, that's what's happened in all other cases.
All right, Samantha, we've got to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. Samantha McConnell, Chief Investment Officer with IFG Corporate Pensions.